Hello everyone and welcome to this event which is part of the series organised by the British Union of Spiritist Societies to celebrate the 175th anniversary of the birth of French Spiritist philosopher Léon Denis. I'm not Adam Cullen, I'm Adam Osborne from Kardec Group, here on behalf of BUS, and today we are joined by our good friend Dan Assisi, who will be talking about the book The Big Enigma by Léon Denis. This event has been organised by the British Union of Spiritist Societies, BUS, and is being streamed on both YouTube and Facebook in partnership with the Irish Spiritist Federation, Kardec Radio and Kardec Group. So please make sure you give a thumbs up and like and share this event, and don't forget to follow and subscribe to these channels as well. And don't forget also to send us a hello in the comment, and just to let us know where you're watching from, because we like to say hello to everyone who's taking part with us today. And stay with us until the very end, please, because we do have a few announcements from BUS, as well as a Q&A with Dan. So let's introduce our guest. Dan Assisi is a founding member of the Spiritist Institute and executive director of the Californian Spiritist Association, and has given lectures to many groups around the world. Dan is a host of Spiritist Conversations podcast and is also an award-winning author of Our Road to Damascus, 7 Lessons for a Life of Purpose, which was published last year. And remember, if you have any questions for Dan, please put them in the comments of the 4 groups who are actually streaming this, not in any of the shares, and we can read them out later. So let's bring on Dan. Dan, hello, how are you?
Hello, friends. It's great to be here. Thank you for hosting me. I really appreciate being with you guys here one more time. Okay. All right, so we are going to jump into this, and I am very excited to be here with you today, although it is early morning for us here in California. So good morning to all our California friends out there. It's about 8 o'clock here in the morning. It is 4 p.m. out there for you guys in the UK and beyond, but nevertheless, we're connected through the miracle of the internet. Spanning multiple time zones to be together here today to talk about a wonderful book and to celebrate this incredible figure that is Léon Denis, the poet philosopher of Spiritism. As we celebrate 175 years of Léon Denis, which is an incredible feat for all of us who have a certain flair or a tendency to fall in love with the poetic words of this philosopher thinker that has found a spot not only in history but also in our hearts with his incredibly beautiful words, his sentencings, his noble and incisive thinking, and persuasive arguments that really speak to our minds and to our souls. And today we really want to spend some time chatting about this book that has been translated from the French as The Big Enigma. And I am going to ask for your indulgence and beg your pardon to actually call it the Great Enigma. For me, and as I look at Léon Denis, that word is very important. It's not just a big enigma that we're talking about here. It is the Great Enigma, the greatest enigma, the most important enigma that we can tackle, that we can think about. And that is how exactly Léon Denis starts his book, when he tells us that in the first line of the first chapter, he puts this question to us: is there a purpose, a law that governs the universe? And by that very sentence and the very chapter, we know that he means business, that he's here to talk about the most consequential question of our age, of our times, of our history, and for ourselves individually. Is there a purpose to it all? Is there something behind the governing of the whole universe, or is it just chance? Are our lives governed by something greater that gives us meaning? Or is it just perchance an act of randomness and chaos that sees the universe go forward? So these are very big ponderings, very big questions. And Denis, not opposed at all to some deep thinking, starts us at the shallow end of the pool by putting this question, and then he throws us deep into thinking about the whole universe so that we can swim for ourselves. But before we go there, before we spend some time, talking about this, I want to take a moment to thank you for inviting me to say hello to some of our friends who are watching from many different places. I want to say hi to my friend Stevan, to Valeria. I see our great Elsa as well. I see Don from Chicago, who's always kind to pop in as well. Thank you so much, friends. Thank you so much for being here. We are really grateful that you have joined us for this moment in time. All right. So, I always like to start by saying that Spiritism has given me two gifts, two incredible gifts, both of which I didn't really expect. One, however, was more unexpected than the other. The first one that perhaps is more expected, more conventional, is that Spiritism has given me a new way of looking at life and the universe that I did not expect. I wasn't expecting to have my paradigm shifted so fundamentally and so greatly by understanding that there is life after life. The way I look at the world today is very different, and that has been an incredibly fulfilling journey to be on. And the second gift that Spiritism has given me, which was very much unexpected, I never really thought possible, was that it connected me to a lot of different people I would not have otherwise met were it not for Spiritism. As we have a chance to be with different people around the world talking about different things, I want to pause and say that I'm very grateful for the friendships that all our UK friends have extended to me, the kindness that they have always shown, and the smiles and the wonderful hosting that you guys have always done. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I feel like you are part of my universal family, and it's really great to be able to see you virtually, even if we cannot do that in person just yet, after these two different and very difficult years that we all have had as a society with this pandemic and so forth. And I say that because it's great for us to celebrate the fact that we are still connected, even if virtually. And that is a beautiful thing, because it's actually one of the points of Léon Denis, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. But it's important for us to center back on that idea a little bit as well, because it is also true that this question that Léon Denis poses to us, is there a purpose? Is there a law that governs the entire world and the universe? It's ever more meaningful now in our times. We do have this book being written in the early part of the 20th century, right about the time when we had the First World War, between the first and the second. And so the world was going through a lot of transformation, and Léon Denis talks to us about that. But it is also true that we are also going through a tremendous amount of transformation. And that question that still lingers in the air and has always lingered in the air throughout our history as human beings applies. What are we here for? Why are we here? Is there a purpose underlying all of this? That, my friends, is the greatest enigma that there ever was. That is the most important question we can answer. And that is exactly how our French poet, friend, and philosopher talks to us when we open these blessed pages of this wonderful book, Le Grand Enigma, or the Great Enigma, as I prefer to call it. I know that it has been translated as the Big Enigma, and while I appreciate the title, I'm going to ask for some poetic license today to refer to it as the Great Enigma, just because I feel like that matches the essence of Léon Denis a tiny little bit better. So, As we go into our conversation today, I'm hoping not to get carried away too much with the beautiful words of Léon Denis and his poetic sense, and make some time for us to have a conversation about this great question that's lingering in the air and in our souls as well. Because I think that if we can expose the thinking of Léon Denis just a little bit to crack it open for us to dive into it together, it might be a more meaningful and engaging experience to you who might be watching this guy through the screen to participate as well. So let's do this. Let's try to make this as short as possible so that we can have a conversation about what it really means to tackle this great enigma. So if you have a chance or had a chance to read this book, you would have noticed that it's a short book. It is perhaps 120 pages, 130 pages, but it's packed with beautiful and beautiful things. In it, Léon Denis gives us an incredible journey, or leads us through an incredible journey that spans science, that spans self-awareness, and that talks about the importance of self-transformation as well. And it's rare that we can find a approach such as this one when we take a scientific focus, but also marry it with a deeper inner search or inner quest for understanding that is not just rational, but that also speaks to the heart. And that is a beautiful journey that Denis takes us on. And he slowly makes that case to place us in a universe that is not just cold and disparate, that is not just vast and perhaps depressing. No, it's one that's vivid, that is full of colors, that is full of aromas, that is full of scenery, that speaks to our soul within the vast constant. But he starts his argument that there is a sense to the universe by investigating this very universe that he is speaking about. He begins to lead us through a brief and beautiful introduction just to think about the astronomical bodies out in the universe, just to remind us of the greatness of the heavenly bodies and all that is out there. We have a journey through the universe. We understand that although Earth in itself can be a beautiful and big place to live in, the universe is much greater than all of us. He takes us through a contemplation of the vast distances of the universe, of the galaxies, of the movement of the solar system and beyond, of the stars, of the Milky Way. He talks about the distances and their magnitude. He reminds us of how large Saturn, for instance, is, and how Jupiter is also humongous, and how many times the Earth could fit inside them, like 700 times, for instance. He reminds us of this vastness of space and the fact that all of these planets and the heavenly bodies are dancing through the galaxy in order and harmony. And that reminds us as well that there is a sense of control, of order that guides all of us. And he starts to dive exactly into that. And he tells us that all of this greatness, all of these systems and everything that is out there needs a starting point. And he asks us, what is that starting point? What is that place? What is that starting point that makes us think? Because as rational beings that we are, we need an understanding of how things work and why they work. That's natural and innate to us. And if that's the case, he starts to show himself as a philosopher that he is. And he brings us through a series of different contemplations and reflections into some beautiful and historical arguments, such as the first unmoved mover that Aristotle first talked about. In this beautiful sentence from early on, he says, we need, therefore, a transcendent first mover to explain how the world works. And what does he mean? What does he mean when he says transcendent, and then also first mover? Well, the first mover is this idea that if everything in the universe has a cause, has an origin, right? Something must have created it. But then if you think about it, well, if I push a shopping cart that is because I propelled it. But I was created by something else. So what created me? And then we started to go backwards in that thinking process to understand how I was created and who created me and so forth. But eventually, our understanding stops at some point because we cannot have an endless line of people pushing things or people creating people and doing things. At one point in time, psychologically and philosophically speaking, we must have had the first unmoved mover, the cause of all things. And he says that that cause is transcendental. That cause transcends our ability to understand it physically. So what he's talking about the concept of God from the beginning. He says that we need to understand this vast universe around us and all the laws that regulate and govern the universe and the physical world and beyond needs a cause. And that transcendental cause is God, the creator, or whatever word you want to use, but he uses the word God. So in his introduction, in his first chapter, he is talking to us about this great question that is necessary for us to tackle if we really are to understand our purpose and meaning in this life and beyond. And he also is introducing to us this idea that for everything else to exist, there must be a centralizing, unifying force. There must be a God. And that is the first creator. And that seems to perhaps very commonplace. Perhaps that's an argument that we made. Well, God created the world. But the beautiful thing is that Denis gets to dive a little bit into science. And he starts talking to us about some concepts in physics and quantum physics today, as we know it, that are beautiful in itself. And he calls actually indirectly upon Einstein here. And when he starts to talk about the role of matter in the universe, and he tells us that all matter can be transformed into energy, and all energy can be condensed into matter. And he begins to weave this relationship between energy and matter to show them that they are not separate from each other, but that they are in fact the same. They're just different manifestations of the same thing. And that is a direct, or I should say indirect, reference to the Einsteinian concept of E equals mc squared, that energy equals mass times the speed of light. That is to say that theoretically speaking, everything that is around us, the matter, is in fact energy in one way, shape, or form. And here he speaks to that being condensed into matter. So he is beginning to make the case that everything around us is in fact energy in different ways. And he goes further and he says, matter can be broken down indefinitely. It is energy made concrete. And he leads us to the greatest thinking at his time, which is still very wonderful at our time, to start to question, what is our physical world made of, after all? Everything around us, if you think about it, the TV, or perhaps the computer monitor, or the mobile device screen that you may be watching this on, it's made of different fragments, different elements of different things. But as we begin to break them down, at the end of the day, they are energy. Because as we begin to understand that everything can be broken down into smaller particles, we arrive at a very beautiful scientific certainty, but a philosophical wonder, which is that the theory that the invisible atom, which stood for 2,000 years as the basis for physics and chemistry, falls apart. That is to say, back in old Greece, when we called the atom, we believed it to be the smallest unit of matter. But now, through our studies, through our scientific explorations into matter, we know that atoms are composed of electrons, neutrons, right? We also know that they can be further broken down into different energies. And as we begin to break the atom into these different particles, and then we break those particles into different forces, we begin to realize that there's a never-ending chain of events, of connections between matter and energy. And that is a beautiful thing, because if you stop to think about it, friends, the moment that we acknowledge that matter, which has stood as the foundation for everything that we have believed around, when it comes to the physical world, falls apart. When we no longer have matter, we arrive at the idea of the spirit. And that is a beautiful argument because it is one done early in the 20th century. And so he says, as we break down matter, we break down this classic distinction between what is tangible that we can hold and what is intangible. And so the reign of matter, so to say, which was thought to be absolute, that it reaches an end. So we can no longer say that I only believe what meets my eyes. Because as a matter of fact, what you see here today and what you touch is just energy condensed in different ways. It is his way, a beautiful way, at arriving at the certainty that the entire world has an energetic component, which defies this previous argument that we've had, that we could not believe in the spirit because we only believe that in which we can touch, smell, and sense. Well, if that which we can touch, smell, or sense can be further broken down and seen mathematically and scientifically as different components of an energetic nature, then this reluctance that we have to acknowledge the spirit must also end. And this idea that only matter exists goes by the wayside. And that's transformational for us in many different ways, because we begin to have in it the certainty that we can operate differently, that we can see the world in a different way. And that is a really important thing. It's core to his argument that is also necessary for us to begin to see life and ourselves anew. And in that manner, he says that science walks little by little towards a great unifying synthesis. And that's a beautiful poetic language, right? And he further asserts that this unifying synthesis, this theory that explains it all, that science constantly seeks, right? The unifying theory of all things, that perhaps you have heard Stephen Hawking's mentioning some of his works, the theory of everything, TOE, really is the fundamental law of nature. That we begin to look deeper into energy and matter to try to understand how it works. And eventually, we wish to arrive at an understanding of the entire universe and the laws that govern it, to know the mind of God, as Hawkins once said. And so it's a beautiful moment because in many different ways, I draw a parallel to the introduction of another wonderful work in the realms of mediumship or in domains of mediumship, published in the 1940s by André Louise and the medium Francis Xavier. But in it, there is an introduction by Emmanuel in which Emmanuel makes this very argument that Léon Denis presents us. He says, as we continue to dive deeper into the atom and see that it can be broken apart, and we're talking about here the early developments of the 20th century with Niels Bohr and the discovery of the atom and how it breaks down and so forth. As we're able to break that down, as we talked about, we understand that materialism, physicalism, is going to do away with itself, because you won't have matter to study anymore. Because now we know that matter is no longer matter, it's just a state of energy. And so, in very beautiful ways, Emmanuel echoes the argument that Léon Denis makes here. And he says that the future belongs to the spirit, because now we know that we are searching for this unifying synthesis that explains all the forces in the universe, and that we could, if we wanted to, and we do, call it God. And that is a fundamental argument that is at the core of everything that really is around us, is this need to reevaluate how we see the universe around us, how we find things around us, and to change our minds and change our perspectives on what the world around us and who we are really are. And why do we say that? Well, it's important for us to say that because he continues to make this beautiful poetic argument. And I really suggest that you read Léon Denis if you have a flair for words and they touch your heart, because he does that in such a lyrical way. He's such a great poetic writer. And he tells us that the question of God is perhaps the gravest of all problems hanging over our heads. And he goes on and says, and its solution is directly and forcefully connected to the question of human beings and our destinies, to our individual and social lives. He says, in other words, that the idea of the existence of God is core to who we are and how we behave. Because how we believe in God, what we believe in, dictates how we act and how we behave in the world. If you believe in God, in a kind and just God, then your actions must necessarily follow that belief, and you must act in a kind and understanding way. He is a true poet of philosophy and of destiny in general, because he makes a direct connection to the beliefs that we hold and the attitudes that we find in our hearts, to the actions that we must employ in our day-to-day lives. And as we begin to think about these wise words of Léon Denis, we begin to see it makes sense. Because if I don't hold in myself an idea of a just and kind God, then my selfish behavior is somewhat justified. If I don't believe in God, then I believe in myself. My ego grows. And when my ego grows, when I begin to think that I am the source of all things in my life, then we begin to make actions that are perhaps a little questionable. We begin to make decisions that are selfish in nature, and that hurts us in the long term as we understand ourselves to be immortal spirits. But on the other hand, if we bind ourselves to the concept that we are immortal spirits and that are governed by this beautiful and majestic law of love that emanates from God, and that there is meaning to the entire universe, then it brings us a certain sense of calm within, and a certain sense of trust that things are going to be okay, and that we are going to be able to navigate everything. And that's a fundamental thing, not only on an individual level, as Léon Denis points here when he says to our individual and social lives, but also to a social one. Not only does it affect ourselves individually as a human being, Dan, Abby, Elsa, Rihanna, Faye, whoever it is, like, not only does that change our individual lives, but it also changes our collective lives, the way we interact with each other, how we decide to govern and institute controls to guide our society and our collective thinking processes and habits. And that's a beautiful thing, because Léon Denis also making the case that it is the individual that transforms society in many different ways. It's important for us to understand that the question of God and how we believe in God is at the center of who we are. It is at the core of what we are and how we are. And that is really a beautiful thing, because it is a question that it is as contemporary as it is historic. It is as beautiful as it is challenging, and it is as daunting as it is liberating as well. Because once we grapple with this idea of what God is to us, we begin to question the core of who we are and how we place ourselves into the world. So I might go out on a limb here and say, if you're watching this today, chances are you do believe in the concept of God. And that is the case. Perhaps we shove it aside and don't think much about it, but let's ask ourselves, what God do I believe in? And more importantly, are my actions aligned with the concept of God that I believe in? That is a really difficult question to ask, because we might find that our actions may not be fully aligned with our concepts. And that is a great enigma of itself as well. But let's not spend too much time here, because there's so much that we can talk about. Because as we do this journey of thinking and rationality, and we visit science when we think about philosophical concepts, Léon Denis also reminds us in the second part of this book, which is composed of 3 parts, that it's important for us to make that journey within as well. When he says, but man is not only reason and consciousness, it is also love. And that's poetic in itself, but it's also very practical. He says, above all, what characterizes human beings are our sentiments, our hearts. And here he speaks to a defining characteristic in our evolutionary sense, that we have this capacity to care for others, to love, to feel, to emote. And that cannot be shoved aside and just saying we ought to use our reason and our rationality. Yes, we ought to use our reason and our rationality, and we ought to marry it to our sentiments and feelings, because it is often they who guide the way we think. And so if we acknowledge that we have this emotional side that sometimes, even sociologically speaking, we seem to have suppressed, or we seem to believe that what is valuable is rationality. And yes, it is, but not a rationality devoid of feelings and devoid of sentiment. We must tap into that social emotional component that we have put by the wayside. Our society has not valued emotions to a great extent. We are told that we should not cry. We're told that we should not express our feelings in public. We have challenges sometimes telling people that we care deeply about, that we love them. Somehow along the way, we have been fed this idea, which Léon Denis helps us deconstruct here, that we should only value rationality, linearity, and mental acuity. And that is very important, yes. But that's not the only thing we ought to learn or ought to value. It's important for us to also put in our pockets, to also put it in the back of our minds, put it in a tool belt, if you will, the certainty that we also have beautiful feelings in the capacity and ability to empathize with each other, to feel with each other, to make that trip within. And that is a beautiful moment, because in doing so, Denis connecting us to two beautiful sides of the same question. He's talking to us about connecting with the outside, with the rationality of things and understanding the physical world and beyond. But he's also inviting us to do this inner journey, to dive within. So if the first part of the book talks about the universe and the causes and so forth, the second one begins to dive into the experience of what it is to be human and to feel. And in that way, he helps us connect the dots in this great enigma, in the search for this great answer to this great enigma, which sometimes I call the longest journey. I feel that Denis is really helping us make the greatest journey that can ever be, and the shortest one, which is the journey from our minds to our hearts, the 12 inches or so that are the hardest to do. And here he is pointing us the way. Understand with our minds, but feel with our hearts. Grasp with our rationality, but emote with all that we are. Because it is not through mind alone that we make sense of the world. There's also a personal, emotional component that needs to be addressed. And he goes through a very beautiful journey of telling us about the things of nature. He tells about the oceans. He tells about the mountains. He tells about the forest. He goes into this beautiful diatribe, so to speak, this beautiful argumentation and perception of the world around us, and how we can find God reflected in that which is before us. He brings, in a manner of speaking, that experience to us and says we can feel and sense the presence of God in things around us. God needs not to come from test tubes and laboratories, from essays written by great philosophical minds, although all those are very wonderful and we should value them. God and the universe and our presence, our spirit, can be sensed in everyday things. It is, in fact, everywhere around us. And in a way, he's inviting us to do that, to feel that, to make that connection between the mind and the heart, the mind and the spirit, if you will, whatever nomenclature you want to use. But it is a beautiful journey that he weaves with wonderful words that connect the mind to the hearts and invites us to make this longest journey, because he ends up by beginning to prognosticate, if you will, what will this new times lead to us, because he tells us, as he is writing this in the 20th century, that the 20th century is an important milestone in our thinking as a society, as a humanity, because these scientific concepts that come will begin to help us crumble or witness the crumbling of everything that built our past. some of these preconceived notions and this sort of materialistic or physicalist twist that we have experienced in the past 2 centuries or so towards this explanation that the world can only be physical, and that the things of the spirit or religion itself, which is such a loaded word, let's just call it for a second, has no place in our understanding of the universe. And he says that these concepts need to fall apart. They need to renew, or they need to fall apart so that we can renew ourselves. And in so doing, he talks exactly about that. He says that if the first part of the 20th century was one of helping us do away with concepts that have shackled us to an understanding that is no longer suited, the second part will be one in which we build these new ideas. And of course, this concept of the 20th century, as we now here sit in the 21st century, is no stranger to us. We see around and look around our society today, and we cannot but feel Léon Denis whisper in our ears how the world is changing, how the universe is changing before our eyes. We, my friends, are in this precipice of change, in this threshold of a new era, in this moment where during a pandemic that has led us to question how we are connected to each other and how important our relationships are, that have also led us to question if the world that we left before the pandemic is really the best world to return to. What are the things that we can think about changing now that we understand that there is a new conception of what science and understanding of spirituality can be, and now that we feel in our hearts as well that there is something greater to this. So what do we do with that, my friends? And that's the question that remains. And he reminds us with a little bit of hope towards the end of the book of the fact that we are not alone in this journey as we understand spirituality. And he says, it is no longer men, the wise and the learned, who bring us a new way of looking at the world. It's no longer just our scientists, just our philosophers. It is the geniuses of space, that is to say, it is the spirits which we have come to interact with through mediumship, through the understanding of the spiritual world that Spiritism brings us. They are the ones who are also coming and whispering in our minds the teachings that will renew the world. He opens the door for us to fully internalize the idea that we need to change the way we accept information about the world. We also can tap into this beautiful new source of information, the spiritual world, in which we get great advice if we know how to discern it. We get great advice about how to position ourselves spiritually, moral, and even intellectually to make the better of the situation right now. And so he reminds us in that way that we are not alone. If the idea of God being present everywhere and being able to be discerned by us was not enough to uplift our hearts, now we are reminded that we have our mentors and guides. We have the good spirits who are always with us, guiding us, and that we are forever connected to these great souls because we too are spirits. And when we are forever connected to greatness, when we are forever connected to love, how can we despair? If we remind ourselves of that fact, if we remind ourselves of the love that we have built in this life and the many lifetimes before, and the cycle of constant evolution that he also talks about in the third part of this book, through reincarnation, if we remind ourselves of these connections, how can we falter, if not just temporarily? How can we remain in a sad place for too long if we know that there is so much love in the universe that's pointed at us, friends? If we recall that we have lived many lives before, and in those lives we had great loves, we have partners, we had mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, friends, and that they continue to love us no matter whether they are with us today or they're still in the spiritual world, how can we falter? How can we struggle with loneliness if we recall that we are part of this greater puzzle of beings and souls? After all, we don't stop loving those who are near us and who pass away, do we? And so Now that we know that there is life after life, what makes us think that they stop loving us? Why do we imagine that they are just gone if now we know that there is spirit communication, that we outlive our physical bodies? So why don't we remind ourselves that they continue to love us? So their love is ever flowing towards us, as it is the love of everything else and everyone else that we've connected to, have met and cultivated in past lives, and that we do not remember. If you think about it, then there is an army of companions of love that is shot our way, so to speak, every single day, of hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of people with whom we have interacted before, who still care for us and want our best. And with that energy, with that understanding, with that connection of the spiritual world, we need to remind ourselves that we are not alone and that we're going to be okay. And in a roundabout way, really what this leads us to is to really think about what's next for each one of us. How will we tackle the great enigma within us? Because while there is a great enigma in science on how to prove the existence of the spirit and whether consciousness outlives the body, we know we will get there. The question now that lingers in the air for us is what do we do with the information that we have in this moment in time? How will we change the world within so that we can change the world outside? Because we're not going to wait for outside validation to things we already know. We need to take action. We need to figure out how we are going to be citizens of this new world. And that is the question that lingers, is how are we going to answer this great enigma that Léon Denis presents to us? We have everything we need, scientifically, emotionally, sensorially, to make sense of the world. How can we do that? How can we solve all these questions? That is an individual challenge, no doubt. But if we are here to close our remarks today about this beautiful work of Léon Denis, then we should also remind that we have specific things here that we should value and we should care about. And I here, obviously, look at me. I am going to go ahead and change my slides here because genius over here that I am, clearly no Léon Denis, forgot to show you actually this slide. Look at that. And I'm going to show you this slide, which is our task and how he suggests we could make sense of this world. He says that our task can be summarized in 3 words: know, believe, and want. And I found that a beautiful framework that can sit with us today and perhaps stay with us a little longer. That if we seek to know the world around us and understand everything that is out there and how the world works and how things take place, if we seek to know that, that's the first step. And then it's also necessary for us to believe, not in believe in things that we don't understand, but believe in the things that we have learned and we already know, and believe that they will point us in the direction that we need to make sense of the world. But none of that will be possible to become the citizens of this new era, to go through this planetary transition, to find the answer of this great enigma, if we don't want to, if we don't have the intention to move forward, if we don't desire to solve that question and address it, if you don't want to make a difference in this world. Know, believe, want. That is a recipe. Léon Denis whispers in our ears that we can continue to understand and perhaps digest over these coming days, months, and years as we think about our role in this new place of answering this great enigma. And so I hope that we may continue to grow our understanding through the beautiful insights that Spiritism brings us, understanding the connection between the realms and who we are. And also that we may believe in all that we read and see by ourselves to craft this new reality for us so that we can then really want to make a change, not only to ourselves, but the world. But friends, the truth is all that I've told you pales in comparison to this beautiful work that is called the Great Enigma, that this poet-philosopher has left us a century ago for us to really dive into the most consequential question of our times and perhaps of our existence or existence. Do we believe? Do we have already within us the certainty that God governs everything that is around us. And if that is the case, then how do we transform our lives? I hope that if you haven't had a chance to read this beautiful and poetic work, you will do so. And I hope that the words of Léon Denis and his actions, above all, may also linger within your soul and find space in your heart to eclode, to explode, to blossom, so that you may find the happiness to which you were destined. And I'm very glad to be able to share some thoughts here with you. And I would love to hear from you as well. So I'm going to pause and see if our friends want to interact. If I haven't put you all to sleep in this late evening in the UK as I wake up here in California.
That was such a wonderful talk and explained the whole book so well. I think everyone's probably just still in a bit of a shock right now and trying to contemplate their thoughts. So I've got a few notes myself, but while we wait for everyone to write up any questions that they have, and make sure that you give a thumbs up, you give a like, you give a hug, anything you want just to express your thanks for Dan for his talk. Let's go to some of the announcements that we have first, and then we'll come back to any items. We've got a few items coming in for the Q&A. So let me share my screen now. Here we go. So, just a couple of announcements that we have from Bus. Spiritual Light, the weekly series with Charles Kempf, Elsa Rossi, Stephen Batozo, and Nadja Gisses takes place every Wednesday on Facebook and YouTube. The next Léon Denis event will be with Emmanuel Dutra, who will be talking about the lectures of Léon Denis. And of course, if you haven't had a chance to watch any of the other episodes so far, or want to watch them again, you can find all of these wonderful people with their wonderful talks on Facebook and YouTube of the 4 channels who are streaming: Bus, Irish Spiritist Federation, Kardec Radio, and Kardec Group. And you see, we're now on the 7th. We're on the 7th talk already, guys. It's gone that fast. Our good friends down in Bournemouth, Fabrizio and Laurie from the Spiritist Society of Bournemouth and Paul Christian Spiritualist Church, they have their fortnightly talks about the psychological series of the books from the Spirit Joanna G. Angelis. The next talks will be on the 16th and 30th of July and on the Facebook and YouTube pages of the Spiritist Society of Bournemouth and the Paul Christian Spiritualist Church. Insightfully speaking, yes, this podcast from us here at Kardec Group. All episodes are available on YouTube and all good podcast systems, and the next episode will be coming out very soon. And you can find all the details on the Kardec Group social media channels, as well as the Kardec Group website. And talking about podcasts, we need to mention Spiritist Conversations with our good friend Dan here. So Dan and Flavio, who we had with us a few months ago, and Susanna Simoins as well, their podcast is available on Facebook, YouTube, and again, all good podcast systems. And there was a new episode just recently, wasn't there, Dan?
Indeed. Thank you for making the space for Spiritist Conversations. We started our 6th season with an interesting conversation about no place for hate. And we love to have informal talks about people where we actually get to interrupt each other and ask the questions of each other that we always wanted to in a very informal place. So thank you for making the space. And I love that we have siblings podcasts here, right? We have the ones that you guys put together. We have Spiritist Conversations. It's loved for us. I love seeing us grow in that space.
Well, great minds think alike. Well, I hope to think that way.
Yes, we want to believe in that, right?
Yeah. And let's also talk about this little book by, I don't know, who's this person, Dr. Dan Assisi?
Sounds familiar.
Our Road to Damascus, the award-winning book, 7 Lessons for a Life of Purpose and Meaning, which is available via all good outlets. And which awards have you been nominated for and have won?
Oh, thank you. Look at that. It's really cool to see people liking it. This book has won the National Indie Excellence Book Award in the area of religion and nonfiction. It's gotten a silver medal on the Illumination Book Awards, which are Christian awards as well, and has also been named a semifinalist and a finalist in other contests, which is really great. It's lovely to see people embrace a book that is not about religion, but it's about a personal take on somebody who's considered to be religious, to Paul the Apostle. So I thank you as well for making the space. And, if you're in a market for a book that talks about self-transformation and how somebody really smart and impactful did that 2,000 years ago and what lessons we can learn from it, may I point you in that direction, available in ebook or paperback or hardcover, whatever you may find it.
Yep. And I'm not saying this just because I know you, Dan, and you're a good friend, but the book really is good. I do recommend that people go out and buy this book if you want self-help books, if you like self-help books, if you like books by Deepak Chopra, by Paulo Coelho. I'm putting you in that same category, Dan. It is
I'll take it. I'll take it, Adam.
Right, okay, and of course, if anyone out there wants to know more about Spiritism, to find a group here in the UK or contact the British Union of Spiritist Societies, you can visit www.bus.org.uk, and for those not watching, that's www.buss.org.uk. You can contact office@bus.org.uk or follow them on Facebook and YouTube as well. And of course, we do have to just remind everyone that right now, due to the pandemic, most groups are not having face-to-face meetings, but they do have public activities online, which people from around the world can access. And many groups are happy to have anyone from anywhere taking part. And some groups will be having hybrid online and presential meetings once COVID restrictions ease. So please do contact any group that may catch your eye, and I'm sure that they'll be more than happy to have you participate if they're doing things online. And again, doesn't matter where you live around the world. So let's have a look now at any questions and comments that have come in from everyone. We've got quite a few hellos. So let's say hello to Elsa, to Faye, to Don, to Val, to Steven, to Abby, to Rihanna, to Munir, to Umberto, to Elsa Lee, Kellen, Dinuel, and Vanderlei. Thank you guys for being with us. Who else? And yep, Kellen and Roberto as well, Patrocino Jose as well. Thank you guys for being with us. It's always great to have people just letting us know where they're watching from. So let's take a look. We have a couple of things here. Lots of hellos coming in. That was a question. Here we go. Our good friend Steven. Dan, in your opinion, how should we prepare ourselves to face our big enigma?
Mr. Steven, great to see your name in the screen there. I hope to see you in the near future in person, my friend. That's a great question, which I think Léon Denis answers to us beautifully, better than I could ever have. By marrying this two different aspects that we have within ourselves, our sensing and perceiving and our intellecting and understanding of the world, by marrying our knowledge and seeking more knowledge of the world around us and how it works, but also taking time for it to settle. And I think that, as Denis does a wonderful job of reminding us of that in the second part of the book, when he talks about nature and the different ways in which we can feel the presence of God as well. I'm reminded of this wonderful psalm that I like from the Old Testament, of course. And it's funny because I'm not an Old Testament kind of guy, but the Psalms sometimes are really nice. And I think it's Psalm 46 or 42. I think it's 46. And says, "Be still and know that I am God." And I think that begs the question that is one that we don't make time for in our current world, which is, are we making enough time in our lives to just sit with the question, to just reflect and let it simmer, so to say? We move so fast sometimes. We're always looking for outside things to occupy our minds, noises to fill our ears, visions to kind be in front of our eyes, and we don't make a lot of time for quietness, for peace, for just silence, so that we have space to breathe, spiritually speaking. And so I wonder if that's not a great tool that we can leverage to solve this great enigma, because many of us have been exposed to convincing arguments from an intellective and cognitive way that there is indeed a creator for the universe. Some of us have already gotten it mentally. The question is, are we making space for that in our hearts? And then are we acting accordingly? And I think reflection is the key here. I sometimes say jokingly, half jokingly, that it dawned on me that I might spend more time in this lifetime brushing my teeth than thinking about God, right? Because at least brushing my teeth, we should be doing it twice a day for 2 minutes each. And so do we spend 4 minutes every day even thinking about ourselves spiritually? Do we make that time for us? I mean, 5 minutes sounds almost so little. It goes by so quick, yet we don't devote that much time to the things of the spirit. So I wonder if one tool that we could use is to, of course, read wonderful books and works such as the one of Léon Denis, which we had the pleasure of reviewing in the 7 different talks that BUS, Kardec Group, and the Irish Federation are bringing together, right? But let's make time for reflection too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is important for us to make time for reflection, though, even if it's just a couple of minutes each day for meditation. So many people saying how important that is right now for us. Just bring up a couple of hellos and thank yous as well. We have Mackenzie Mello as well, who we forgot to mention. And, everyone's loved to talk. But
well, and we should say hi to our friend Mackenzie, also a brother from a different mother. Mackenzie does a beautiful job at out there in Massachusetts, and every year he puts together a series of events he calls Gillespie. And it's a beautiful opportunity also to broaden your understanding of different topics. So if you're interested, go say hello to Mackenzie and our little spot of light out there in Peabody, Massachusetts.
Great, yeah. Okay. Where is the other question? The other question we have is from Faye. Faye asks, Dan, in your view, how could Denis see the connection between the scientific thought of his time and cosmos or creation?
Faye, what a beautiful and deep question. And I think that this is the kind of question that Léon Denis would eat up for breakfast, right? He would love that question because I think that's his sweet spot. He does such a beautiful job of connecting these two seemingly separate topics, right? Scientific thought, and this inner tendency or inner propensity to look inside. And if we are curious about how this particular work, for instance, came about, if we read the introduction, he says some beautiful things. He says, "Here's how this book came about. I was walking in the Côte d'Azur, right, in the coast of Provence, and in a beautiful evening afternoon, just pondering about life and seeing the sun setting in the ocean and the moon rising in the beautiful blue sky." And he describes in ways that only Léon Denis can. And he says, and I felt, the wind blowing, and I heard it in my mind, write a little book about everything that humans need to know, and we will inspire you, right? So I think that we ought to say that no doubt Léon Denis was greatly inspired when writing his books, as he often is, such a lyrical and beautiful tone. It's almost like he's writing poetry in prose, right? He is that kind of a good writer. And I imagine, for the little that I can understand in French, of how beautiful it is in French, right? But I think that that's the beauty of Denis. He sees this connection between science and the beauty of the cosmos. He has done us a great favor in reminding us that we need to refute this somewhat crazy assumption we have made over these past 2 centuries, that science and spirituality are things that are on separate ends or different ends of the spectrum. That if you believe in science, you cannot be a follower of religion, or if you believe in religion, you cannot dive into science. Léon Denis says, no, that's not the case, because in fact, he prognosticates that the more we look into science, the more we'll see God. And that is a beautiful approach, one that I think resonates really well with the Spiritist perspective. Because after all, Spiritism has come from a DNA of inquiry, right? The Spiritism has come from trying to understand phenomena that were taking place and make sense of it. It didn't come from a religious perspective. It didn't come from somebody saying, I'm going to create a new way of thinking. It was like, hey, these weird phenomena are taking place. Let's check it out, right? And what does this mean? Well, there must be fraud here. Let's investigate this fraud thing. And whoa, hold on a second. There is no fraud. There's actually, intelligent phenomena taking place. And if intelligent phenomena are taking place, then the cause must be intelligent. There must be a reason behind this. And so that's what really fascinates me about Spiritism. And I'm going to bet my bottom dollar there, as we say, that's also what called Denis into Spiritism, is this understanding that we can make sense of the world, of ourselves as spiritists, as spirits, as spiritualists, as whatever the heck we call ourselves, by looking at science and then applying it to our moral and spiritual lives. And I think that's what Denis does so well. And I think that in the future, as we're seeing today, we are going to be seeing a lot of scientists, a lot of philosophers making the case for this connection with God and the great spiritual peace. Because as Denis hints at us, the farther we look down into matter, the less matter or material it is. It's more energetic. And as we go into the realm of energies, it really becomes so subtle and so small and unquantifiable for our lay brains to grasp, that we arrive at this idea of the spirit. It's a beautiful thing. So I really appreciate Denis and what he does best, which is to bring some beautiful and deep thoughts that were well researched. I mean, he was a philosopher. He was really a well-read man. If you read his works, he will cite other works. He'll reference other works that are very interesting in themselves. But he does that with such a soul, right? A soulful approach. He brings his heart to bear in examining all of that. It is truly amazing. He's a special guy. And I am sure that he continues his studies and inspiring us, as he let us know when he communicated with us one more time. I think it was in 1998 in the World Spiritist Congress out in France, where he said a hello as well in a message. So it's really wonderful to see that we too can take that road and marry our understanding of what the scientific world looks like and what it means to us internally. So that the formula he gives us, right? Know, believe, and want. It's still pretty powerful. Let's seek out knowledge. Let's stand on that knowledge and believe that it can take us places. And then let's act. Let's do something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And just another comment here from Faye saying, your response is really inspiring. Thanks, Dan. Yeah. And comes across as poet of greatness found in ordinary things. Absolutely.
Indeed. Absolutely. And that's sometimes what makes him makes you hate Léon Denis a little bit, right? Because he's like, oh my goodness, how can he see so much beauty in that? I wish I could do that, right? Like I wish I had thought about that, because he is really indeed a great mind that really adds to our understanding in such a soulful way.
Yeah. And when you're talking before about the transcendent first mover, that's sometimes I like to equate that to a very inquisitive child. Like, why is that? Why is that?
Why is that?
Why is that?
Yeah.
Why is that?
We all had that moment, right? Like, why is that? Right?
Yeah. But it makes sense when we look at the first question of the Spirit's book. What is God? And we try to relate everything back to that. Like, what caused this? Why is that? Why is that?
Isn't it hard, right? It's really hard, right, Adam, to think about, a first mover. We're so used of our minds are still so small to comprehend the idea of God that we always want a cause to a cause to a cause to a cause. But to arrive at the starting point of it all, for me, it's mind-boggling, at least for my little brain.
Yeah. Well, there aren't that many questions come in because I think you probably explained things so well. But I do have a question myself. It's not for myself because it's something I understand, but I know that there may be one or two people who may be thinking this. So, because you're mentioning about the need of believing, about how to believe in God, but what if someone doesn't believe in God? How can they believe in what this thing called God or the grand old dude really is?
Yeah, it's a great question, Adam, because everything that I feel like there is so much baggage in the word believe, right? Because sometimes I think the assumption we make is believing is about just accepting with any proof. It's just holding on to an idea. And for some people, that's hard because it's almost like, like building a castle up in the air. It's hard, right? Like if you don't have a foundation for things. But I think that the point that Léon Denis makes here is that we need to know before we believe. And I think that is a concept and an idea that is underlying in Spiritism as well, right? Search for the facts first. And once you have those facts, put them together to create a structure or something that you can then build on. So I think that the belief in God, right, which is a really big thing, it's also very similar to that. We feel like that we either believe in God or we don't, but it is possible to build a muscle. As we are talking about here, and as we look at everything around us and apply that childish in a good way, right? Why is that? Why is that? We are going to find that the more we dig deeper into the causes of things, we can't ultimately arrive at anything that explains it, in a way that we clearly understand. But there has to be a beginning to things. And that beginning to things is God, philosophically speaking. So that's one argument that we can kind of hold our hats to and say, although I cannot fully comprehend God just yet, much like a third grader cannot understand quantum physics, right? We know that there is such a thing as physics, and we can work towards it. I also would say, because I like to talk a lot, and you can shut me up at any point in time, is that the word God also has a loaded meaning to us, right? Of a religious nature. I think that we have heard of God from different people, and it's important for us to separate what we have heard from others from that which we can find for ourselves. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think a little bit is what he talks about in the 20th century of letting the past crumble a little bit. Like, let's let our preconceived notions of what we believed sit by the wayside for a little bit, and let's rebuild our own understanding of things. Because maybe our understanding of religion, for instance, is based on what was imposed on us. And if we are able to break that down, if we're able to break down the concept of God or Christ, for that matter, right, what other people have told us, or what we think there's a culturally accepted meaning, and find our own, then we're in a better place to understand God. And maybe you need a different word. Maybe you need a walk in the woods. Maybe it is that connection, right? We didn't talk about here, but Léon Denis spends a great time talking about prayer and demystifying prayer in this book and saying, it's not about formula. It's about that feeling that you have, a connection to something greater. I think we all can tap into that realm of emotions and experiences we've had, where we had a sublime moment at one point in our lives where we sat down and we said, wow, this sunset is beautiful. Wow, this is a wonderful cloud or sky, right? That sense of wonder might be one of the ways in which we find the manifestation of God. So work with what you have and then move it from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
All that to say, I didn't bring certainty to anybody on that one, but you got to find your own certainty.
Yeah, we have to find the own truths within ourselves, but obviously we have all this great literature around to help us. And our good friend Umberto said, Léon Denis never disappoints.
Never. It does. Umberto is once again very right. A philosopher of great caliber himself, right? Greatly apt to talk about our resident philosopher, right? Léon Denis here. Very true. He is incredibly wide in terms of his reach, Léon Denis, right? And so deep as well. There's always a little bit of a treasure to be found there when you read anything by Denis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's it. I think that's about it for now. A few other things come in. There's another question from Abby, but it's actually more about Spiritism here in the UK. Abby, feel free to contact the British Union of Spiritist Societies, or contact us here at Kardec Kardec Group, and be more than happy to tell you more about things here in the UK. But yes, so our question is, how is Spiritism here in the UK? There are many groups. We've got 34, 35 groups currently in the UK of different degrees, and many groups are, like I said before, many groups are meeting online at the moment, and anyone from around the world is welcome for all their public meetings. So,
and Adam, let me do a plug for the UK groups here really quick because I can't stop talking. Spiritism is a wonderful body of knowledge that lets you learn by yourself if you like, right? So you have these great words that you can read, and you should read them and ponder about them and make time for reflection. But there's also great benefit in coming together with people and discussing it. And that is done really well at the UK Spiritist groups. So if you are interested in this idea, go talk to some folks as well, who are also willing to explore things, because we learn so much in a conversation when we are together, right? And you will enjoy it much more than just listening to a single, bald guy from California talking to you about a book for 40 minutes. It's really a wonderful experience. And I hope that if you're watching this, you get to visit some of our UK groups.
Oh, yeah. And all the groups are really lovely. So
yes, and they have this wonderful accent, too, that makes you feel so much more smarter than us Americans, right?
Thank you for saying so. Well, Dan, any last reflections from yourself before we end?
No, just a sense of gratitude to Denis for reminding today and always that there is space for us to make a connection between our hearts and our minds, that we can arrive at the beauty of God and how impactful it can be by intuiting it, from feeling it, but also from working this great gift that God has given us, which is our mind. So I hope that more and more we have a chance to talk about the beauty of connecting the dots between science and perception, our experience and theory. And it's just a wonderful gift to be reminded and to have such beautiful works, such as the ones that he put forth to us, to expand the concept of Spiritism in an era where Kardec kick-started with great logic, and I think Denis adds great depth and feeling to it as well. So thank you, and thank you for our friends, BUS, the Irish Spirits Federation, Kardec Radio, and of course the Kardec Group as well, for making the space for such wonderful debate about Denis and his works and the impact it has in our lives. And I hope that you'll feel inspired to read it for yourself, because he can say it better than I would ever will be able to.
I think you explained it perfectly well enough. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for being with us today. Let's pop you backstage for just a moment, and I'll be back with you in just a few seconds. And so, folks, that just gives me, the great pleasure again to say thank you to Dan Assisi for being with us. Thank you, British Union of Spiritist Societies, for organising this event. Thank you to the Irish Spiritist Federation, Kardec Radio and Kardec Group for transmitting the event. And to thank all of you who've been with us today. I'll be back with you again on the 7th of August 2021 with Emmanuel Dutra, who'll be talking about the lectures of Léon Denis. So thank you for being with us, keep safe, and we hope to see you again very, very soon.